I stood in my study, watching her through the security camera as she tried to access our safe, unaware that I had already emptied it weeks ago. Sarah had no idea that while she thought she was destroying my life by selling our dream house to her lover, she was actually walking straight into my trap. The deed she sold was still in my name, and what was about to unfold would make her regret ever trying to cross a real estate attorney. The timestamp on my phone read 2:47 p.m. when I clicked the notification from my home security app. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I had known this moment was coming. Sarah had grown predictable in her desperation. Through the crystal-clear footage, I watched as she frantically punched in the code to our wall safe, her perfectly manicured nails trembling slightly. The look of shock on her face when the safe swung open to reveal nothing but empty space was almost worth the $3 million she had tried to steal from me. "Looking for something?" I asked, stepping into the doorway of my home office. Sarah spun around, her designer dress swishing with the movement, her face a mixture of surprise and poorly concealed guilt. For someone who had spent the last 6 months meticulously planning to rob me blind, she wasn't very good at hiding her emotions. "James," she said, trying to steady her voice, "I was just—" She gestured vaguely at the safe, her platinum wedding ring catching the afternoon light. The same ring that cost me 2 months' salary when I still believed in forever. "Just trying to grab the property documents before your flight tomorrow?" I finished for her, keeping my voice casual, almost friendly. Her eyes widened slightly. Of course I knew about her flight. I knew everything. The carefully hidden affair with Marcus, the secret meetings with shady notaries, the forged documents. What she didn't know was that I had been 10 steps ahead of her this entire time. Sarah's perfectly sculpted eyebrows furrowed, a tell she had whenever she was about to lie. "I don't know what you're talking about. I was just looking for my grandmother's jewelry." The same grandmother's jewelry she had secretly pawned 3 months ago, another fact she didn't know I was aware of. I leaned against the doorframe, sliding my hands into the pockets of my tailored suit. "Interesting. Not looking for the deed to our house, the one you sold to Marcus last week?" The color drained from her face, but she quickly tried to recover, straightening her spine and lifting her chin. Classic Sarah, always trying to maintain control even when caught red-handed. "If you already know, then there's nothing left to discuss," she said coldly, attempting to brush past me. I didn't move from the doorway. "The house is sold, James. It's done. Marcus owns it now, and there's nothing you can do about it." I couldn't help but smile. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment when Sarah thought she had won, thought she had successfully pulled off her little scheme. "You really should have paid more attention when I tried to explain property law to you over the years, Sarah." She paused, uncertainty flickering across her face. "What are you talking about? The sale is complete. I signed the papers myself." "Ah, yes, you did sign papers," I agreed, pulling my phone from my pocket and pulling up a document. "Just not the ones you thought you were signing." Sarah's confidence wavered for the first time. "Stop playing games, James. I know what I signed. Marcus and I went through everything with a notary." "A notary?" I raised an eyebrow. "You mean Robert Keller? The same Robert Keller who's been my colleague for 15 years? The one who called me the moment you and your boyfriend walked into his office?" The look of realization that crossed her face was priceless. Sarah had always been clever, but her arrogance made her careless. She had assumed that in a city of 8 million people, she could walk into any notary's office and not run into someone who knew me. That had been her first mistake. That's impossible," she stammered, her designer purse clutched tightly against her chest like a shield. "I saw the deed transfer. Marcus has the papers." I pulled out my tablet, opening a file I had been saving for this exact moment. "You mean these papers? The ones where you unknowingly signed over your entire interest in the property to me?" I turned the screen toward her, watching as her eyes scanned the document, growing wider with each line she read. "This can't be legal," she whispered, but I could hear the tremor of uncertainty in her voice. "Oh, but it is. Very legal, in fact. You see, Sarah, when you married a real estate attorney, you should have realized that any attempt to secretly sell our property would be—" I paused, enjoying the moment, and complicated. Sarah's composure finally cracked. "You set me up." "No, Sarah, you set yourself up. I just made sure you faced the consequences of your actions." I stepped aside, finally giving her a clear path to the door. "Now, about that flight tomorrow, I wouldn't bother. The house you thought you sold? It's still mine. And Marcus, well, let's just say he's about to learn a very expensive lesson about trying to buy stolen property." She stood there, frozen, as the full weight of her situation crashed down around her. Everything she had planned, every careful move she had calculated, had just blown up in her face. And the best part, this was just the beginning. "You won't get away with this," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. I smiled, straightening my tie. "I already have. Oh, and Sarah," I called as she started to walk away, her shoulders slumped in defeat. "You might want to check your phone. I have a feeling Marcus is about to have some very interesting news for you." As I watched her hurry down the hallway, her high heels clicking against the hardwood floors we had picked out together years ago, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. Sarah thought she had orchestrated the perfect plan to take everything from me. Instead, she had just lost everything herself. I pulled out my phone, sending a quick text to Robert. "It's done. Proceed with phase 2. The response came immediately. "Documents are ready. She won't know what hit her." I walked over to the window, watching as Sarah got into her Mercedes, another gift from our marriage she would soon have to part with. The sun was setting over the city skyline, casting long shadows across our pristine lawn. Well, my lawn. Now, and this was just the beginning of Sarah's education in why you should never try to outsmart a real estate attorney who specializes in property law. The real estate game was my life's work, my expertise, my domain. Sarah had just tried to play a game she didn't understand, with rules she didn't know, against someone who had written the rule book. Now she was about to learn exactly how expensive that mistake would be. 2 weeks earlier, I was sitting in my corner office at Patterson and Brooks, reviewing a complex property dispute case, when my secretary, Maria, knocked on my door. The hesitation in her knock was unusual. Maria had been with me for 8 years and normally burst in with her characteristic energy. This time she lingered in the doorway, clutching a thick manila envelope like it might bite her. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, her usually cheerful voice subdued. "This just came from the county recorder's office. I think you need to see it right away." I gestured for her to come in, setting aside the case files I'd been reviewing. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across my polished mahogany desk. Maria placed the envelope in front of me, then took a step back, wringing her hands, another uncharacteristic gesture that set off alarm bells in my head. "What is it, Maria?" I asked, reaching for the envelope. She shook her head slightly. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Reynolds. I double-checked everything when I saw it. Triple-checked, actually. I even called my contact at the recorder's office to verify." My stomach tightened as I pulled out the contents. The first page was a property transfer document, and there at the top was my address, 1857 Lakeside Drive, the dream house I'd spent years designing and building. My eyes scanned down the page, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. Seller: Sarah Reynolds. Buyer: Marcus Davidson. Sale: price $750,000. I stared at the number, my legal mind already calculating. Our house was worth $3.2 million in the current market. Sarah had sold it for less than a quarter of its value. To her lover. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Without my knowledge or consent. The date, Maria said softly, pointing to the corner of the document. It was filed, and 3 days ago. 3 days ago. My mind flashed back to Tuesday evening. Sarah and I had been sitting on our terrace, sharing a bottle of wine she'd brought back from her business trip to Napa. She'd been laughing at my jokes, touching my arm, playing the role of devoted wife, while the ink was still drying on documents that would steal my home out from under me. "There's more," Maria added, pulling out her tablet. "I did some digging on the buyer, Marcus Davidson. He's a personal trainer at the elite club." She paused, clearly uncomfortable with what she was about to say. "The same gym where Sarah's been going 5 times a week for the past 8 months, of course. The sudden interest in fitness, the designer workout clothes, the late-night training sessions, all those pieces that had been nagging at the back of my mind suddenly clicked into place. I'd been so busy with the Thompson property development. In case I'd ignored the signs right in front of me, Mr. Reynolds. Maria's voice cut through my thoughts. Should I call Richard in legal? I shook my head, forcing my breathing to remain steady. No, not yet. I need you to do something else for me first. I pulled out a legal pad, writing down a series of instructions. I need every document related to our house, every permit, every inspection report, every deed restriction. And Maria, I looked up at her. I need you to be discreet. If anyone asks, you're pulling records for the Thompson case. She nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. What about your afternoon? Appointments? Cancel everything except the meeting with Judge Harrison. I needed to keep that one. The judge owed me a favor, and I had a feeling I'd be needing it soon. After Maria left, I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing through scenarios and strategies. Sarah had always been clever, but she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd forgotten what I did for a living. For 15 years, I'd specialized in real estate law, building a reputation as the guy who could spot a property loophole from a mile away. I'd written contracts that were practically bulletproof, saved countless clients from real estate fraud, and built my career on understanding every nuance of property law. And now my wife thought she could outmaneuver me in my own field. I pulled up our house's original documentation on my computer. Sarah and I had built it 4 years ago, at the height of the real estate boom. I'd handled all the legal aspects personally, making sure every detail was perfect, or at least I thought I had. A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. It was Robert Keller, one of our firm's most trusted notaries and a long-time friend. "James," he said, closing the door behind him, "I just heard from Maria. Tell me she's wrong about what Sarah did." I showed him the transfer document. Robert let out a low whistle. "Jesus, James, did she really think she could get away with this?" "Apparently," I said, scrolling through more documents on my screen, "but here's what I don't understand. She needed my signature for a legal transfer. The house is in both our names." Robert sat down, his face grave. "Actually, about that." He pulled out his phone, showing me a series of text messages. "Sarah came to my office last week with this guy, Marcus. She had what looked like your power of attorney." My head snapped up. "What?" "I knew something was off," Robert continued. "The signature looked good, but Sarah was too nervous, kept pushing to rush the process. I stalled them, told them there was a mandatory waiting period for property transfers over a certain value. Been trying to figure out how to tell you." I leaned forward, my mind already spinning with possibilities. "Robert, I need you to do something for me, something that stays between us." He nodded without hesitation. We'd been friends since law school, and he knew me well enough to trust my judgment. "Whatever you need. When Sarah comes back, and she will come back, I need you to process whatever documents she brings exactly as she asks." But I smiled for the first time since seeing the transfer papers. I need you to make sure certain other documents get filed first." Robert's eyes widened as he caught on. "You're going to let her think she's winning?" "Better than that," I said, pulling up our house's original deed on my screen. "I'm going to let her walk right into a trap of her own making." The next few hours were a blur of activity. While Maria gathered the documents I needed, I made a series of careful phone calls, first to my bank, then to our family lawyer, and finally to a private investigator I'd worked with on previous cases. Each conversation was brief, precise, and completely confidential. By evening, I had everything I needed. The original deed to our house, the construction permits, the property restrictions, and most importantly, a crucial detail Sarah had overlooked. When we built the house, I'd included a specific clause in the deed. Any transfer of ownership required verification through the original building permits, which were in my name alone. Sarah had forged my power of attorney, but she hadn't forged my building credentials. She couldn't. Those records were tied to my professional license, my insurance, my entire career. By trying to transfer the house without proper verification, she'd not only committed fraud, she'd given me the perfect weapon to use against her. I was still at my desk when darkness fell over the city. The lights of other buildings twinkled like stars, reminding me of the night Sarah and I had first seen the lot where our house would be built. She'd been so excited, talking about our future, our dreams, our life together. Now, those same dreams had turned to ash, but from those ashes I was going to build something else. Justice. My phone buzzed. A text from the PI. "Surveillance confirmed. Target spent 3 hours at the elite club, not working out." Attached was a photo of Sarah and Marcus leaving an upscale restaurant, his hand on the small of her back, her wedding ring clearly visible as she reached up to caress his face. I saved the photo, but didn't respond. Instead, I pulled up the property transfer documents again, noting every flaw, every mistake, every opportunity Sarah had given me to turn her plan against her. By the time I was done, I had mapped out exactly how this would play out. Sarah thought she was clever, using my own profession against me. She thought that by selling our dream house to her lover, she could force me out of my own life. What she didn't realize was that she'd just stepped into a game where I wrote the rules, and I was about to teach her exactly why you don't challenge a real estate attorney to a property war. I picked up my phone, dialing Robert's number. "Set up the meeting for tomorrow," I said when he answered. "Let them think everything's proceeding normally. Oh, and Robert, make sure you file those special documents we discussed first thing in the morning." "Already done," he replied. "The timing on this is going to be perfect." I hung up, a sense of calm settling over me. Tomorrow, Sarah would try to complete her plan, thinking she had successfully stolen my home and my dignity. Instead, she was about to learn a very expensive lesson about the true meaning of property law. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in my home office, surrounded by property documents, building permits and deed restrictions, crafting the perfect trap. The house was quiet. Sarah had texted saying she was staying late at the office, which I knew meant she was with Marcus, probably celebrating what they thought was their victory. The irony wasn't lost on me. While they toasted to their success, I was using their own arrogance to ensure their downfall. I pulled up the special documents Robert had filed that morning, a smile playing at my lips as I reviewed them one more time. Sarah had no idea that 4 months ago I'd filed a property covenant addendum. It was a standard document, nothing that would raise red flags if someone happened to check the records. But buried in the legal jargon was a clause that would prove to be her undoing. Any sale of the property within 5 years of the addendum required approval from the original permit holder, me. My phone buzzed. A text from Detective Miranda Parker, an old friend from college who now worked in the Financial Crimes Division. Just reviewed those documents you sent. If what you're showing me is accurate, this isn't just fraud. It's grand theft. I typed. Back, how solid is the case? Her response came quickly. Rock solid. Forged power of attorney, fraudulent property transfer, attempted theft over 2 million. She's looking at serious charges if you want to pursue them. I set my phone down, letting that information sink in. The criminal charges were my nuclear option. A last resort if Sarah somehow managed to wriggle out of the trap I'd set, but I had something better in mind, something that would hurt her more than any prison sentence. Complete financial destruction. A soft ding from my laptop pulled my attention back to the screen. My email had just refreshed, showing a new message from Judge Harrison. James, per our discussion, I've reviewed the property documents. The covenant addendum is ironclad. Any attempt to transfer ownership without proper authorization is void ab initio. Moreover, given the circumstances, you have grounds for immediate injunctive relief, if needed. Keep me posted. William Perfect. I now had a judge ready to sign emergency orders the moment I needed them. Sarah and Marcus thought they were being clever, but they were playing checkers while I was playing chess. I pulled up another document, the building permits for our house. Sarah didn't know it, but I'd structured the original construction permits in a unique way. Because I'd used my professional credentials as a real estate attorney, any transfer of the property required verification through the State Bar Association. It was a security measure I'd implemented to protect against exactly this type of fraud. My computer chimed again, an alert from the home security system. Sarah was pulling into the driveway. I quickly saved all the documents and cleared my screen. Through the security feed, I watched her step out of her car, stumbling slightly. She'd been drinking, celebrating, no doubt. A few minutes later, I heard her key in the front door. Her heels clicked on the marble floor of the foyer, then stopped. She must have seen the light from my office. James. Her voice carried up the stairs, trying to sound casual but with an edge of uncertainty. You're still up? I didn't respond. Instead, I pulled up the property transfer document she'd filed with Robert, waiting. Her footsteps resumed, getting closer until she appeared in my doorway. She'd changed clothes since this morning, wearing a new dress I'd never seen before, probably a gift from Marcus. Working late? She asked, leaning against the doorframe with forced nonchalance. I looked up, meeting her eyes, just reviewing some interesting property documents. She stiffened almost imperceptibly, but kept her smile in place. Anything important? Very, I said, turning my screen so she could see it. Tell me, Sarah, did you really think I wouldn't find out about the transfer? The color drained from her face, but she recovered quickly. I was going to tell you, she said, stepping into the office. I needed to make some changes in my life. Changes, I repeated, my voice flat. Like selling our home to your personal trainer for a quarter of its value? She lifted her chin defiantly. The house is sold, James. The papers are filed. It's done. I couldn't help but laugh. Is that what Marcus told you, that it's all taken care of? Don't say his name like that, she snapped, her composure cracking slightly. Marcus and you what? I interrupted, standing up. Thought you could commit fraud and get away with it. Thought you could forge my power of attorney and I wouldn't notice? She faltered, taking a small step back. I don't know what you're talking about. I had power of attorney. Really? I opened a drawer, pulling out a document. You mean this power of attorney? The one with my forged signature? I laid it on the desk between us. The one that, if I'm not mistaken, your friend Melissa helped you create? You know, the same Melissa who works as a paralegal at Davidson and Mills? Sarah's eyes widened. She hadn't expected me to know about Melissa. How did you— I'm a lawyer, Sarah. Did you really think I wouldn't investigate? That I wouldn't find out about every meeting, every document, every person involved in your little scheme? She swallowed hard, but tried to maintain her ground. It doesn't matter. The transfer is complete. The house belongs to Marcus now. I smiled, pulling up another document on my screen. Actually, it doesn't. You see, when we built this house, I included some special provisions in the permits, provisions that make any unauthorized transfer null and void. You're lying, she whispered, but I could see the fear creeping into her eyes. Am I? I turned, the screen toward her. These building permits are tied to my professional license. Any transfer of property requires verification through the State Bar Association. Did Marcus's lawyer mention that, or were you too busy planning how to spend my money to check the actual legal requirements? Sarah grabbed the edge of my desk, her knuckles turning white. This isn't possible. Robert said everything was in order. Robert? I laughed. You mean Robert Keller, my friend and colleague of 15 years? The same Robert who called me the moment you walked into his office, with your forged documents? The realization hit her like a physical blow. She staggered back, her designer purse slipping from her shoulder. No, she breathed. No, you're just trying to scare me. I stood up, straightening my tie. Sarah, if I wanted to scare you, I'd tell you about the meeting I have tomorrow morning with the Financial Crimes Division, about how forgery and real estate fraud are felonies in this state, about how attempting to steal property worth over $2 million carries a minimum sentence of 5 years. Her face went pale. You wouldn't. You're right, I said, walking around the desk. I won't, because I have something much better planned. I picked up my phone, sending a pre-written text to Robert. In fact, it's already in motion. Sarah's phone buzzed in her purse. Then again, and again. She pulled it out with trembling hands, her eyes growing wider as she read the messages. What did you do? She demanded, her voice shaking. I walked to the window, looking out over the city lights. I simply filed some paperwork of my own. You'll find out the details soon enough. I turned back to her, my voice cold. You know, Sarah, you really should have paid more attention when I tried to explain property law to you over the years. It might have saved you from what's coming next. She opened her mouth to respond, but her phone buzzed again. This time, when she looked at it, all the color drained from her face. Marcus, she whispered, he's saying the transfer was rejected, that there's some kind of lien on the property. I smiled. Like I said, you'll find out everything soon enough. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have an early meeting tomorrow. I walked past her toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Sarah, you might want to start looking for a new place to live. Because this house, it was never yours to sell. Morning came, with a series of increasingly panicked texts from Sarah. I ignored them all, focusing instead on preparing for my 9 a.m. meeting. Through the security cameras, I watched her pace the kitchen, alternating between calling Marcus and frantically typing on her laptop. She was finally starting to realize that her perfect plan wasn't so perfect after all. I adjusted my tie in the mirror, thinking back to the day we bought it together. A 5th anniversary gift from her. Back, when our marriage still meant something. Now it served as a reminder of all her lies. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Sarah. James, please, we need to talk about this. What you're doing isn't fair. I almost laughed at the irony. She wanted to talk about fairness now after trying to steal my home, after betraying everything we'd built together. I typed out a response, then deleted it. No, silence would be more effective. Let her stew in her own anxiety. At exactly 8:30 a.m. my phone rang. The caller ID showed Marcus Davidson. I let it ring 3 times before answering. James Reynolds. Speaking, I said, my voice professionally neutral. Mr. Reynolds. Marcus's voice was tense, trying to sound authoritative but failing miserably. We need to discuss the house situation. I settled into my office chair, enjoying this moment. The fraudulent transfer situation, you mean? Or the forged power of attorney situation? You'll have to be more specific, Marcus. There are quite a few situations we could discuss. He cleared his throat, clearly thrown off balance. Look, I know things got complicated, but surely we can work something out, maybe reach a settlement. A settlement? I repeated, letting him hear my amusement. You tried to steal my $3.2 million home for $750,000 using forged documents. What exactly do you think we can work out? The transfer was legal, he insisted, but his voice wavered. Sarah had power of attorney. A forged power of attorney, I corrected him, which, by the way, is a felony in this state. But please, continue explaining to me, a real estate attorney with 20 years of experience, how your attempted property theft was legal. Silence on the other end. Then, more subdued, what do you want? Want? I stood up, walking to my window. I don't want anything, Marcus. I already have everything I need. The question is, what are you going to do when the State Bar Association's investigation begins? When they start looking into how a personal trainer suddenly tried to acquire a multi-million-dollar property for a fraction of its value using forged documents. Investigation. His voice cracked slightly. What investigation? I smiled, though. He couldn't see it. Oh, did Sarah not mention that part? Any suspicious property transfers involving an attorney's credentials trigger an automatic review. Standard procedure, really. I'm sure your lawyer explained all this when you were planning your little scheme. I paused. You did consult a lawyer, didn't you? More silence. Of course he hadn't consulted a lawyer. Sarah had convinced him they could handle everything themselves, that her knowledge from being married to me was enough. Amateur hour. The review board meeting is next week, I continued casually. They'll want to speak with everyone involved. You, Sarah, the notary, everyone. They're particularly interested in where you got the $750,000 for the purchase. Something about money laundering concerns. Money laundering? Marcus's voice rose an octave. No, that money was legitimate. It was from my savings and... Your savings? I interrupted. Interesting. According to your tax returns for the past 5 years, your annual income as a personal trainer at the elite club is $47,000. Yet somehow you had $750,000 in savings to buy a house. The review board will definitely want to hear about that. How did you get my tax returns? I'm thorough, Marcus. Very thorough. I know about the money Sarah transferred to your account from our joint savings. I know about the offshore account you two set up. I even know about the consultation you had with that shady real estate agent in Tampa last month, planning your escape route, I assume. The sharp intake of breath told me I'd hit a nerve. Listen, he said, his voice urgent. Now I can explain everything. Sarah said a lot of things, didn't she? I cut him off. She said she had authority to sell the house. She said the transfer would be clean. She said I'd never figure it out. She was wrong about all of it. Please. He was practically begging now. There has to be something we can do. I can't have this kind of investigation. My professional license, your personal training license. I laughed. Marcus, that's going to be the least of your concerns very soon. The fraud division is particularly interested in that offshore account you opened. Did you declare that on your taxes? Dead silence. Then, barely above a whisper, what do you want me to do? I sat back down at my desk, pulling up a document on my computer. Check your email. You'll find a confession I've drafted admitting your role in the attempted fraud. Sign it, have it notarized, and deliver it to my office by noon today. Then, withdraw your claim to the property and transfer any remaining funds back to their original accounts. And if I do this, then maybe I don't pursue criminal charges. But understand this, Marcus. You have until noon. After that, everything goes to the fraud division, the State Bar Association, and the IRS. Your choice. I hung up before he could respond, then pulled up the security camera feed again. Sarah was still in the kitchen, but now she was crying, mascara running down her cheeks as she clutched her phone. Right on cue, it must have rung, because she quickly answered it, her expression changing from despair to shock as she listened. My own phone buzzed. A text from Robert. "Marcus just called. Wants to meet right away to fix this situation. Should I take the meeting?" I typed back, "Yes. Have the confession ready. And Robert, make sure he understands exactly how much trouble he's in." Setting my phone down, I turned to my computer and began typing out the next phase of my plan. Sarah and Marcus thought they were being clever, trying to use property law to steal my home. Instead, they were about to learn why you don't try to outmaneuver a real estate attorney in his own field. The morning sun climbed higher over the city skyline, casting long shadows across my desk. In a few hours, Marcus would sign his confession. Sarah would realize her lover had abandoned her, and their entire scheme would crumble. But that was just the beginning. I pulled up another document, the real trap I had set. While they had been fumbling with forged powers of attorney and fraudulent transfers, I had been laying the groundwork for something much bigger, something that would not only protect my home, but would ensure that Sarah and Marcus spent years dealing with the consequences of their actions. My phone buzzed again. Another desperate text from Sarah. "Please, James, let's talk about this." "I'll do anything," I smiled, remembering all the times she had dismissed my attempts to explain property law to her, all the times she had rolled her eyes when I talked about the importance of proper documentation. Now she was about to get an education she would never forget. "Anything," I typed back, my first response to her all morning. "Good, because what's coming next will require your full attention." At exactly 11:58 a.m., Robert sent me a photo of Marcus's signed confession. The man's signature was shaky, a far cry from his usual confident scrawl on the gym membership contracts he got people to sign. Below it was a blue notary stamp and Robert's own elegant signature. Everything perfectly legal, perfectly documented, and perfectly damning. I forwarded the photo to Detective Parker with a simple message. "Evidence secured. Proceed as discussed." She replied almost immediately, "Got it. Financial Crimes Unit is ready. Should I send the preliminary findings to your wife's lawyer, or does she not know she needs one yet?" I smiled. Sarah hadn't even thought about legal representation yet. She still believed she could talk her way out of this, charm her way back into control like she always did. She had no idea that while she was trying to figure out how to save her relationship with Marcus, I was systematically dismantling her entire financial future. My phone rang, Sarah again. This time I answered. Finally, she breathed, relief evident in her voice. "James, we need to—" "Did Marcus tell you he signed a confession?" I interrupted, keeping my voice casual. The silence on the other end was deafening. Then, "What? Oh, you haven't heard?" I clicked through some files on my computer. "He came in about an hour ago, signed a full confession admitting to his role in the attempted property fraud. Would you like me to read it to you?" He wouldn't," she whispered, but I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. "Let's see," I said, opening the document. "According to his sworn statement, you approached him 6 months ago with a plan to transfer my house into his name. You promised him a share of the profits when you sold it. You arranged for the forged power of attorney. You even opened an offshore account to hide the money." I paused. "Am I missing anything?" "He's lying," she hissed, but her voice cracked. "Whatever he said, he's lying." "Really?" "Because his statement matches perfectly with the evidence we've gathered. The bank transfers, the email trails, the recorded conversations with the notary." I let that sink in. "Did you really think I wouldn't investigate, Sarah? That I wouldn't find every piece of evidence, every connection, every detail of your little scheme?" "I want to see it," she demanded. "I want to see this supposed confession." "Of course," I said smoothly. "My office, 1 hour, bring your lawyer." "My lawyer? Oh, you don't have one yet?" I couldn't keep the amusement out of my voice. "You might want to fix that. Quickly, because in about 20 minutes, the Financial Crimes Unit is going to receive a very interesting package of documents. Something tells me you're going to need legal representation. I hung up, then turned to my computer to check the security cameras. Sarah was in our bedroom, soon to be my bedroom alone, pacing frantically as she made call after call. I zoomed in on her face, watching as the reality of her situation finally started to hit her. My office phone buzzed. Maria's voice came through the speaker. "Mr. Reynolds, Mrs. Reynolds is here. She's insisting on seeing you immediately." I checked my watch, 40 minutes early. Sarah never could follow instructions. "Send her in." Sarah burst through my office door like a hurricane, her designer dress wrinkled, her usually perfect makeup smeared. "Where is it?" she demanded. "Where's this confession Marcus supposedly signed?" I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "Have a seat, Sarah." "I don't want to sit. I want to see what lies Marcus told you." "Lies?" I pulled up the signed confession on my monitor, turning it so she could see. Like the lie about how you promised him $1 million from the sale of my house, or the lie about how you assured him the power of attorney was legitimate. Which lie would you like to discuss first? She leaned forward, her eyes scanning. The document growing wider with each line. I watched as the color drained from her face, as her perfectly manicured hands began to shake. He threw me under the bus," she whispered. "Actually," I said, pulling up another document, "he just confirmed what we already knew. You see, while you were busy planning your little property theft, I was building a case. Every meeting you had with Marcus, every phone call, every email, all documented. The offshore account, tracked. The forged power of attorney, traced back to your friend Melissa's computer." Sarah gripped the edge of my desk, her knuckles turning white. "You can't prove any of that." I started clicking through files on my screen. Bank statements showing transfers from our joint account to Marcus's personal account. Emails between you and Melissa discussing the forged documents. Security footage from Robert's office showing you presenting the fake power of attorney. Phone records showing calls to offshore banks. I looked up at her. "Would you like me to continue?" "Those are private," she snapped. "You had no right." "I had every right," I cut her off. "The moment you tried to steal my house, you gave me every right to investigate." "And investigate I did, thoroughly." She straightened up, trying to regain her composure. "Fine, what do you want? Money, is that it? Name your price." I actually laughed at that. "Money? Sarah, you don't have any money. Every account you have access to has been frozen pending the fraud investigation. That includes your personal accounts, your credit cards, even that secret account you opened in the Caymans." The last bit made her physically stagger. "How did you know about the Cayman account?" "The same way I know about the cash you've been squirreling away at your sister's house. The same way I know about the consultations you and Marcus had with real estate agents in Florida. Like I said, I was thorough." Sarah sank into the chair, her facade finally cracking completely. "James, please," she whispered. "We can work this out. We can fix this." "Fix this?" I stood up, walking around my desk. "Like you tried to fix your relationship with Marcus. How did that work out? One hint of legal trouble, and he turned on you so fast it would make your head spin." Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then let out a small sob. "He's not answering my calls." "Of course he's not," I said, leaning against my desk. "He's probably too busy meeting with his own lawyer, trying to save himself from the criminal charges he's facing. That's the thing about co-conspirators, Sarah. They tend to abandon ship at the first sign of trouble. Criminal charges." Her voice was barely a whisper. I nodded. "Fraud, conspiracy, money laundering. The list is quite impressive, actually." Detective Parker was particularly interested in the offshore accounts. The IRS tends to frown on those. Sarah's head snapped up. "You involved the police?" "No, Sarah. You involved the police when you decided to commit multiple felonies." I just made sure they had all the evidence they needed. She stood up suddenly, her chair scraping against the floor. I need to go. I need to think. By all means, I gestured to the door. Think about it. Think about how you're going to explain this to your lawyer. Think about how you're going to defend yourself when the evidence is presented. Think about what your future looks like now, that your perfect plan has fallen apart. She moved toward the door, then paused, turning back. Why are you doing this? Why not just divorce me and be done with it? I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Because you didn't just try to end our marriage, Sarah. You tried to steal my home. You tried to destroy everything I've built. And now you're going to learn exactly what that mistake is going to cost you. She fled my office, leaving behind only the lingering scent of her expensive perfume and the echo of her heels on the marble floor. I sat back down at my desk, pulling up the final set of documents I'd been preparing. Sarah thought this was bad. She had no idea what was coming next, because while she'd been focused on stealing my house, I'd been building something much bigger, a case that would not only protect my property, but would ensure she spent years dealing with the consequences of her actions. My phone buzzed, a text from Detective Parker. Financial Crimes Unit just received the documents. They're impressed. Your wife's going to have a very interesting afternoon. I smiled, thinking about the storm that was about to break over Sarah's perfectly coiffed head. She had tried to use my profession against me, tried to manipulate property, law to steal my home. Now, she was about to learn why that had been the biggest mistake of her life. The next morning, I was reviewing case files in my office when Maria buzzed through. Mr. Reynolds, there's a Ms. Catherine Mitchell here to see you. She paused, then added in a lower voice, She says she's Sarah's sister. I smiled, having expected this visit. Catherine had always been Sarah's safety net, the person she ran to whenever her schemes backfired. Send her in. Catherine stormed into my office like an avenging angel, her blonde hair flying and her face flushed with righteous indignation. She looked so much like Sarah it was almost amusing, right down to the designer handbag and perfectly manicured nails. What the hell are you doing to my sister? She demanded, planting her hands on my desk. I leaned back in my chair, completely unfazed. Hello, Catherine. Please have a seat. I don't want to sit, she snapped. I want to know why Sarah showed up at my house last night crying about police investigations and frozen accounts. Ah, I nodded, pulling up a file on my computer. You mean after she realized her attempt to steal my house had failed, or after she discovered her lover had turned state's evidence against her? You'll have to be more specific, Catherine faltered slightly. She said you're trying to destroy her. No, I corrected, turning my monitor so she could see it. She destroyed herself. Would you like to see how? Without waiting for her response, I started clicking through documents. Here's the forged power of attorney she used to try to transfer my house. Here are the bank statements showing how she embezzled money from our joint accounts. Here's the paperwork for the offshore account she opened. I paused, looking up at her. Should I continue? Catherine sank into the chair she had previously refused, her face pale. This can't be right. Sarah wouldn't what? Commit fraud, steal from her husband, try to sell our home to her boyfriend for a fraction of its value? I laughed humorlessly, because she did all of that and more. She said you were being unreasonable, Catherine whispered, that you were trying to punish her for falling in love with someone else. I pulled up another document, the signed confession from Marcus. Is that what she told you? Did she mention that her new love just signed a detailed confession, throwing her under the bus to save himself? Or that she's potentially facing criminal charges for fraud and money laundering? Catherine's hands began to shake. Criminal charges? Detective Parker, I said, picking up my phone and dialing. Would you mind explaining to Ms. Mitchell exactly what charges her sister is facing? I put the phone on speaker just as Detective Parker's crisp voice came through. Ms. Mitchell, based on the evidence we've gathered, your sister is looking at multiple felony counts. Fraud, conspiracy, money laundering, attempted grand theft. The list is quite extensive. Catherine's face had gone from pale to ashen. But there must be some mistake. No mistake, Detective Parker continued. We have documented evidence of your sister's involvement in a complex scheme to defraud Mr. Reynolds of his property. The offshore accounts alone are enough to trigger a federal investigation. I ended the call, letting silence fill the office as Catherine processed what she'd heard. Finally, she looked up at me, her eyes wide. What's going to happen to her? That depends, I said, steepling my fingers, on how quickly she realizes that her only option is to cooperate fully and accept the consequences of her actions. James, please. Catherine leaned forward, her voice dropping to a plea. She's still your wife. Surely there's something... Ex-wife. I corrected. The divorce papers were filed this morning, and no, there's nothing to be done. Sarah made her choices. Now she gets to live with them. Catherine's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then let out a small gasp. The police are at her gym. They're questioning everyone about Marcus. Standard procedure, I explained, though I knew exactly why they were there. They need to establish the timeline of Sarah's relationship with Marcus, track their communications, verify their conspiracy. Conspiracy? Catherine repeated weakly. I pulled up another document. According to Marcus's confession, Sarah approached him 6 months ago with a plan to transfer my house into his name. They would then sell it at market value and split the profits. I looked up at her. Did she mention any of that when she was crying on your shoulder last night? Catherine shook her head slowly. She said you were being vindictive because she fell in love with someone else. I couldn't help but laugh. Vindictive? I'm being thorough. Sarah tried to steal my home, Catherine. She forged documents, laundered money, and conspired with her lover to commit fraud. The fact that she's facing consequences for her actions isn't vindictiveness, it's justice. But her whole life... Catherine trailed off, realizing the magnitude of what was happening. Her whole life was built on lies, I finished for her. The perfect wife, the successful realtor, the woman who had everything under control. It was all a facade. And now? Now everyone gets to see what's behind that facade. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a news alert. I turned it to show Catherine. A local business website had just published an article, High-End Realtor Under Investigation for Property Fraud. Catherine's hand flew to her mouth. Oh God, the news travels fast in our circles, I said, setting my phone down. By tonight, everyone in our social circle will know. Her clients, her friends, her colleagues. Everyone will know exactly what Sarah did. She'll never recover from this, Catherine whispered. No, I agreed, she won't. But then again, she didn't care about what would happen to me when she tried to steal my home, did she? Catherine stood up, her legs unsteady. I should... Go check on her. Before you do, I said, pulling out a folder, you might want to take this with you. It's a complete record of everything Sarah did, including the evidence that's been turned over to the authorities. I held it out to her. So the next time she tries to play the victim, you'll know exactly what kind of person you're really dealing with. She took the folder with trembling hands, then turned to leave. At the door, she paused. You know, when Sarah first told me about the divorce, I thought you were the bad guy. I thought you thought what Sarah wanted you to think. I finished for her. That's what she does, Catherine. She manipulates people, twists situations to her advantage, plays the victim while she's actually the perpetrator. But this time, I smiled coldly. This time, she picked the wrong target. After Catherine left, I turned back to my computer, pulling up the surveillance feed from our house. soon to be my house alone. Sarah was there, frantically packing bags, probably planning to run to her sister's house again. She had no idea that Catherine was no longer a safe harbor. My phone buzzed, a text from Detective Parker. Search warrant just came through, ready to move when you give the word. I typed back, let her pack first. I want her to really feel it when everything comes crashing down. Setting my phone down, I leaned back in my chair, satisfaction coursing through me. Sarah had thought she was so clever, using my profession against me, trying to manipulate property law to steal my home. Instead, she had given me everything. I needed to destroy her completely. The best part, I hadn't had to do anything illegal or unethical. I had simply gathered evidence, followed proper procedures, and let the justice system do its work. Sarah had built her own trap, and now she was watching helplessly as it snapped shut around her. My office phone buzzed again. Maria's voice came through. Mr. Reynolds, the reporter from the Business Journal is on line 1. They want a comment about Mrs. Reynolds' fraud investigation. I smiled, picking up the phone. It was time to make sure everyone knew exactly what kind of person Sarah really was. Put them through, I said. I think it's time for the truth to come out. The article hit the local Business Journal's website at exactly 3 p.m. By 3:05, my phone was exploding with notifications. Colleagues, friends, and even clients were sending me links to the story. Its headline stark against the white background. Prominent realtor faces federal investigation in multi-million-dollar property fraud scheme. I sat in my office watching. The story spread like wildfire across local news sites and social media. The reporter had done a thorough job, laying out Sarah's attempted fraud in meticulous detail. Every fact checked, every allegation supported by documentation, every quote carefully attributed. It was devastating in its precision. My phone rang. Judge Harrison's name flashed on the screen. "James," he said when I answered, his voice grave. "I just read the article. Tell me they got the details wrong." "Every word is accurate, Bill," I replied, pulling up the article on my screen. "I provided all the documentation myself." He let out a low whistle. "Jesus, James. When you said Sarah had tried to steal your house, I thought you meant through the divorce. But this is something else entirely." "It gets better," I said, opening another file. "The FBI just opened an investigation into the offshore accounts. Apparently, Sarah and Marcus's little scheme triggered some international banking red flags. The FBI." He paused. "James, she's looking at serious time if this goes federal." I know. And I did know. I had spent weeks mapping out exactly how this would play out, calculating every possible consequence. "She brought this on herself, Bill." "No argument there," he agreed. "Still, this is going to destroy her completely. Her career, her reputation, everything. I thought about all the nights I had spent building our dream house, all the times Sarah had smiled and nodded while plotting behind my back. That's the point. After hanging up, I checked the security cameras at home. Sarah was in our bedroom, soon to be my bedroom alone, sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at her phone. I zoomed in on her face, watching as she scrolled through what was probably an endless stream of messages and missed calls. Her perfect world was crumbling, and she was finally realizing she couldn't charm or manipulate her way out of this one. My office phone buzzed. Maria's voice came through. "Mr. Reynolds, Mrs. Reynolds' attorney is on line 1. Ah, so Sarah had finally hired a lawyer. About time. "Put him through. Mr. Reynolds." A smooth, professional voice came over the speaker. "This is David Blackwood from Blackwood and Associates. I'm representing your wife in this matter." "Ex-wife," I corrected. "And which matter are we discussing? The fraud, the money laundering, the attempted property theft? You'll have to be more specific, Mr. Blackwood." He cleared his throat. "I've reviewed the article in the Business Journal. My client feels that many of the allegations are exaggerated." I actually laughed at that. Exaggerated. Every single claim in that article is supported by documented evidence. Would you like me to send you copies? The forged power of attorney? The offshore bank statements? Marcus Davidson's signed confession? Silence on the other end. Then more cautiously, my client is willing to discuss a settlement. A settlement, I repeated, enjoying this moment. Mr. Blackwood, perhaps you don't understand the situation. This isn't just about my house anymore. The FBI is investigating your client for international money laundering. The State Bar Association is reviewing the forged documents. The IRS is looking into undeclared offshore accounts. What exactly do you think you can settle? Another pause. The criminal charges are out of my hands. I cut him off. Sarah committed multiple felonies, Mr. Blackwood. That's not something you can make disappear with a settlement offer. There must be something we can work out, he pressed, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. Some arrangement that could benefit both parties. I leaned back in my chair, thinking about all the times Sarah had tried to work something out in her favor. Actually, there is something your client can do. Yes? The hope in his voice was almost pathetic. She can confess to everything. The fraud, the theft, the money laundering. A full, detailed confession of every crime she committed, every person she involved, every dollar she tried to steal. That would be unwise from a legal standpoint. More unwise than trying to steal a $3.2 million house using forged documents, I asked. More unwise than opening illegal offshore accounts. More unwise than conspiring with her lover to commit real estate fraud. Silence again. Then, I'll need to consult with my client. Of course, I said smoothly. But Mr. Blackwood, you might want to ask for your retainer up front. All of Sarah's accounts are frozen pending the federal investigation. After hanging up, I turned back to my computer, pulling up the surveillance. Feed again. Sarah was now pacing the bedroom, probably on the phone with her new lawyer, trying to figure out how to escape the trap she had built for herself. My phone buzzed. A text from Detective Parker. FBI just approved the warrant for the offshore accounts. They're moving fast on this one. I smiled, typing back, keep me posted. I want to know the moment they find everything. Setting my phone down, I pulled up another document. The complete timeline of Sarah's crimes that I had compiled. Every meeting with Marcus, every forged document, every illegal transfer, all meticulously documented and verified. It was the kind of thorough, detailed work that had made me successful in real estate law. Now it was going to be the evidence that destroyed Sarah completely. My office phone buzzed again. Maria's voice came through. Mr. Reynolds, Channel 5 News is here. They're requesting an interview about the fraud investigation. Perfect timing. I'd been waiting for the local TV stations to pick up the story. Tell them I'll be down in 5 minutes. I stood up, straightening my tie in the reflection of my office window. The city stretched out below, the same view I had shared with Sarah when we first opened this office. She had stood right here, promising to build a life together, all while planning to tear everything apart. My phone buzzed one final time, a text from Robert. Just got word from my contact at the Bar Association. They're expediting the review of the forged documents. Sarah's realtor license is as good as gone. I smiled, sliding my phone into my pocket. Sarah had thought she could use my profession against me, trying to manipulate property law to steal my home. Instead, she had given me everything I needed to ensure she never worked in real estate again. The elevator dinged as I reached the lobby, and I could see the Channel 5 news crew setting up their equipment. It was time to make sure everyone knew exactly what kind of person Sarah really was, and why you should never try to outsmart a real estate attorney at his own game. The Channel 5 interview aired on the evening news, reaching every household in the metropolitan area. I sat in my office watching the broadcast on my laptop as the reporter laid out the story with devastating clarity. The camera work was excellent. catching every detail of my composed expressions as I explained how my wife had attempted to steal our dream house through fraud and forgery. "Mr. Reynolds," the reporter had asked, "how did you discover your wife's scheme?" "Like many things in life," I had responded, maintaining perfect professional calm, "it came down to attention to detail. As a real estate attorney, I'm trained to notice when property transactions don't add up. When I discovered that my home had been sold without my knowledge or consent, I knew something was seriously wrong. The story was barely an hour old when my phone started ringing. This time, it was Sarah's mother, Elizabeth. "James," she began, her voice tight with controlled anger. "What are you doing to my daughter?" I leaned back in my chair, switching my phone to speaker. "Hello, Elizabeth. I assume you've seen the news? This is cruel, James. Exposing her like this, destroying her reputation." "Your daughter," I interrupted smoothly, "tried to steal my $3 million home using forged documents. She conspired with her lover to commit fraud. She opened illegal offshore accounts to hide stolen money. Would you prefer I kept that quiet?" She made a mistake. "No!" I cut her off again. "A mistake is forgetting to sign a document. A mistake is missing a deadline. What Sarah did was commit multiple felonies with full knowledge and intent. There's a difference. She's going to lose everything." Elizabeth's voice cracked slightly. I pulled up the surveillance feed on my computer. Sarah was still at home, now sitting in our kitchen with her head in her hands, her phone buzzing endlessly on the counter beside her. "Yes," I agreed, "she is, just like she planned for me to lose everything when she tried to steal my house." "Please," Elizabeth's voice dropped to a whisper. "There must be something we can do, some way to fix this." I thought about all the family, dinners, all the holidays where Elizabeth had treated me like a son, all while her daughter was plotting to destroy me. Your daughter fixed this herself, Elizabeth. Every choice she made, every crime she committed, every lie she told, those were all her decisions. Now she gets to live with the consequences. After hanging up, I turned my attention back to the surveillance feed. Sarah had finally moved from the kitchen to the home office, my home office, and was frantically going through the filing cabinets. I zoomed in, watching as she pulled out folder after folder, probably searching for something she could use as leverage. My phone buzzed, a text from Detective Parker. "FBI just accessed the offshore accounts. You're not going to believe what they found." I smiled, typing back, "Let me guess, more than just the house money?" "Much more. They're tracking transfers going back months. Your wife's been busy." Perfect. I had suspected Sarah's scheme went deeper than just the house. She'd always been greedy, always wanted more. Now that greed was going to be her undoing. My office phone rang again. This time it was Marcus's lawyer, Mr. Reynolds. The man sounded exhausted. "In light of recent developments, my client would like to revise his statement." "Revise it?" I asked, though I knew exactly what was coming. "He has additional information about Mrs. Reynolds' activities, information he thinks the authorities should know." I leaned forward, enjoying this moment. "You mean he wants to throw her under the bus even harder to save himself?" A pause. "My client is willing to cooperate fully with the investigation." "I'm sure he is," I said, pulling up Marcus's original confession on my screen. "Tell me, does this additional information include the real estate scams they were planning in Florida? Or perhaps the other properties they were targeting?" Sharp intake of breath on the other end. "How did you—" "I'm thorough," I cut him off. "Very thorough. You might want to tell your client that when he's revising his statement." After ending the call, I checked my email. The Bar Association had sent their preliminary findings regarding the forged documents. It was even better than I'd hoped. They weren't just going after Sarah's realtor license. They were recommending criminal charges for fraud against the state. My phone buzzed again. Sarah's lawyer this time. "Mr. Reynolds." Blackwood sounded significantly less confident than in our last conversation. "I've reviewed the evidence with my client. She's willing to make a full confession." "Is she?" I couldn't keep the satisfaction out of my voice. "And what brought about this sudden attack of conscience?" He cleared his throat uncomfortably. "The FBI's findings regarding the offshore accounts have complicated matters." "You mean she realizes she's caught and is trying to save herself?" "My client understands the severity of her situation," he said carefully. "She's prepared to cooperate, fully in exchange for considerations." I laughed. "Considerations? Mr. Blackwood, your client committed multiple federal crimes. She's facing charges for fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. What exactly do you think you can negotiate?" Silence on the other end. "Then the prosecutor mentioned your influence might help with a plea deal. Did they?" I pulled up another document on my screen, the complete record of Sarah's crimes that I had compiled. And why would I want to help the woman who tried? "To steal my home? Mr. Reynolds, please. She's facing serious time." "Good," I cut him off. "She deserves it. Every charge, every consequence, every moment of punishment, she earned all of it. Tell your client to enjoy her plea bargain negotiations. I'm sure the FBI will be very interested in everything she has to say." I hung up, then turned back to the surveillance feed. Sarah had moved to our bedroom and was now throwing clothes into a suitcase, her movements frantic and uncoordinated. The carefully put-together woman who had plotted to steal my home was gone, replaced by someone who finally realized just how completely she had destroyed herself. My phone buzzed one final time. A text from Robert. "Just got word from the Untitled Company. The deed investigation is complete. The house is officially clear of all claims. It's yours, free and clear." I smiled, standing up to look out over the city. Sarah had thought she was so clever, using my profession against me to steal my home. Instead, she had given me everything I needed to ensure she never had a home of her own again. Through the window, I could see Channel 5's news van pulling up outside my office building again. Time for the follow-up interview, where I would reveal the FBI's findings about the offshore accounts. Sarah's world wasn't just crumbling, it was being systematically dismantled, piece by piece, in front of everyone she knew. And the best part? I hadn't had to do anything except let her own crimes catch up with her. The second Channel 5 interview hit harder than the first. This time, I shared details about the FBI's investigation into the offshore accounts, carefully laying out how Sarah had been systematically stealing and hiding money for months. The reporter was particularly interested in the fact that she had been planning similar schemes with other properties. "So this wasn't an isolated incident?" the reporter asked, her eyes wide with practiced concern. "According to the FBI's investigation," I replied, maintaining my professional demeanor, "my wife and her lover had plans to target other high-value properties. They had already made contact with real estate agents in Florida and had begun setting up additional offshore accounts. The story aired at 6, and by 6:30, my phone was flooded with messages from other property owners in our social circle, people who had trusted Sarah, who had invited her into their homes, who had shared details about their real estate holdings with her. Now they were all wondering if they had been potential targets. My phone rang. It was Richard Thompson, one of our biggest clients. "James," he said without preamble, "please tell me Sarah never had access to any of our property documents." I pulled up his file on my computer. "Don't worry, Richard. I handled all your real estate matters personally. Sarah never had access to any sensitive information." He exhaled heavily. "Thank God." When I saw the news, "James, we had her over for dinner last month. She was asking all these questions about our vacation home in Aspen." "Gathering information," I confirmed, making a note to pass this on to Detective Parker. "She was likely assessing potential targets." "Jesus," he muttered. She seemed so genuine, so interested in our lives. To think she was actually planning to steal your property? I finished for him. That's what Sarah does, Richard. She makes... You trust her while she figures out how to take everything you have. After hanging up, I checked the security cameras at home. Sarah was in full panic mode now, rushing from room to room, stuffing valuables into bags. I zoomed in on her face. Her perfect makeup was smeared, her designer clothes wrinkled. The composed facade she had maintained for so long was completely shattered. My phone buzzed. Detective Parker again. FBI just froze all accounts connected to your wife, including some we didn't know about. She's completely cut off. I smiled, typing back, how many additional accounts? 3 more offshore, 2 under aliases. She's been planning this for longer than we thought. Of course she had. Sarah had always been greedy, always wanted more. What I hadn't realized until now was just how long she had been plotting to take everything from everyone around her. My office phone rang. Maria's voice came through. Mr. Reynolds? Mrs. Reynolds is here. She's quite insistent on seeing you. I checked my watch. Right on schedule. Send her in. Sarah burst into my office, looking nothing like the polished socialite she usually presented to the world. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes wild, her movements jerky with desperation. "Stop this," she demanded, her voice cracking. "You have to stop this." I leaned back in my chair, studying her. "Stop what exactly? The FBI investigation, the news coverage, the criminal charges? You'll have to be more specific." "All of it," she practically screamed. "You're destroying my life." "No, Sarah," I said calmly. "You destroyed your own life. Every crime you committed, every lie you told, every person you tried to steal from, those were all your choices." "I'll tell everyone," she threatened, but her voice wavered. "I'll tell them how controlling you were, how you drove me to this—" "Go ahead," I interrupted, pulling up my email. "While you're doing that, I'll just forward these documents to the prosecutor. Your correspondence with Marcus about targeting other properties, your emails to offshore banks, your conversations with that forger in Tampa." I looked up at her. "Should I continue?" She staggered slightly, gripping the edge of my desk. You can't prove any of that." "Actually, I can. Prove all of it. Every email, every text, every phone call, all documented, all verified, all admissible in court." I stood up, walking around my desk. "Did you really think I wouldn't investigate thoroughly, that I wouldn't find every piece of evidence, every connection, every plan you made?" "I'll lose everything," she whispered, and for the first time, I heard real fear in her voice. "Yes," I agreed, "you will. Your reputation, your career, your freedom, it's all gone. Just like you planned for me to lose everything when you tried to steal my home." She sank into a chair, her designer purse falling forgotten to the floor. "Please," she whispered, "there must be something I can do, some way to fix this." I sat on the edge of my desk, looking down at her. "There is one thing." Her head snapped up, hope flickering in her eyes. "Anything. Confess," I said simply, "to everything, every crime, every scheme, every person you involved. Write it all down, sign it, and hand it over to the FBI." "That would mean prison." She breathed. "Yes," I nodded. "It would, but it might mean slightly less prison than if they have to prove everything without your cooperation." She stood up suddenly, anger replacing fear. "You bastard! You're enjoying this!" "Actually," I said, walking back around my desk, "I'm just being thorough. Something you should have considered when you decided to cross a real estate attorney." My phone buzzed. Another text from Detective Parker. "Search warrant just came through for her sister's house. Ready to move on your signal." I looked up at Sarah, who was still standing there, trembling with rage and fear. "You might want to call your sister," I said casually. "The FBI is about to find that cash you've been hiding at her house." All the color drained from her face. "How did you know about that?" "The same way I know about everything else you've done. I told you." "Sarah, I'm thorough." I picked up my phone. "Should I tell them to proceed with the search?" She crumpled then, literally falling back into the chair as the last of her defenses shattered. "You've thought of everything, haven't you?" "No," I corrected her. "You did. Every crime you committed, every trace you left, every piece of evidence. You created. Those were all your doing. I just made sure it all came to light." My office phone buzzed again. Maria's voice. "Mr. Reynolds? The FBI agents are here for their appointment." Sarah's head snapped up, panic flooding her features. "FBI, here." "Did you think they wouldn't want to interview me about your other planned property thefts?" I asked, standing up. "About all those other homes you and Marcus were planning to steal?" She stood up shakily, gathering her fallen purse. "I need to go. I need to—" "Run?" I finished for her. "That would be unwise. Very unwise. The FBI tends to frown on flight risks." She moved toward the door, then paused, turning back. "Why are you doing this? Why not just divorce me and be done with it?" I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Because you didn't just try to end our marriage, Sarah. You tried to steal my home. You tried to destroy everything I've built. And now you get to experience exactly what that feels like." She fled my office, nearly running into the FBI agents as they stepped off the elevator. I watched through my office window as they stopped. Their badges already out. My phone buzzed one final time. A message from Robert. "Just got word from the prosecutor. With the new evidence from the FBI, Sarah's looking at 15 to 20 years, minimum." I sat back down at my desk, a sense of satisfaction washing over me. Sarah had thought she could use my profession against me, had thought she could manipulate property, law to steal my home. Instead, she had given me everything I needed to ensure she spent the next 2 decades regretting that decision. Through my office window, I could see her being led into an FBI vehicle, her perfect world completely destroyed. And the best part? I hadn't had to do anything except let her own crimes catch up with her. 6 months later, I sat in the courtroom, watching as Sarah stood before the judge in her prison-issued jumpsuit, a far cry from the designer clothes she used to wear. Her once perfect hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face bare of makeup. She looked small, diminished, nothing like the confident woman who had tried to steal everything from me. "Mrs. Reynolds," Judge Harrison's voice filled the courtroom, "you stand before this court having pled guilty to multiple federal charges, including fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering. Before I pass sentence, do you have anything you wish to say?" Sarah glanced back at the courtroom, her eyes finding mine for a moment before quickly looking away. "Yes, Your Honor," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I want to apologize for my actions. I made terrible choices, and Choices?" the judge interrupted. "Mrs. Reynolds, you didn't simply make poor choices. You orchestrated an elaborate scheme to defraud multiple people, including your own husband. You forged legal documents, opened illegal offshore accounts, and conspired to steal millions in property." Sarah's shoulders slumped. Behind her, her lawyer shifted uncomfortably. They both knew what was coming. "Furthermore," Judge Harrison continued, "the evidence suggests this wasn't an isolated incident. You and your co-conspirator, Mr. Davidson, had plans to target other properties. You betrayed not only your husband but also the trust of countless others in your community." I watched as Sarah seemed to shrink even further. Gone was the woman who had smirked while telling me she had sold our house to her lover. Gone was the manipulator who thought she could outsmart everyone around her. The judge shuffled some papers, then looked directly at Sarah. "Taking all factors into consideration, including your guilty plea and cooperation with authorities, I hereby sentence you to 18 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release. You're also ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $4.2 million. The gavel came down with a final, decisive crack. Sarah swayed slightly, steadied only by her lawyer's hand on her arm. As the bailiff approached to lead her away, She turned one last time, her eyes meeting mine. I saw something there I had never seen before, complete and utter defeat. After the sentencing, I stepped out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sun. Detective Parker was waiting by her car. 18 years, she said as I approached. That's on the heavy side of what we expected. I nodded, loosening my tie. The judge wasn't pleased about the other properties she and Marcus had targeted. Speaking of which, how did his sentencing go? 12 years, she replied. His cooperation earned him some leniency. He provided evidence against 3 other people involved in their schemes. And the money? Most of it's been recovered from the offshore accounts. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit is still tracking down a few transfers, but they're confident they'll find everything. I thought about the millions Sarah had tried to steal, not just from me, but from others who had trusted her. What about her real estate license? Detective Parker smiled. Permanently revoked. The Bar Association's review was thorough. She'll never work in real estate again. My phone buzzed. A text from Robert. Final property documents are ready. The house is officially clear of all claims. Want to grab a drink to celebrate? I smiled, typing back a quick agreement. Looking up at the courthouse one last time, I thought about how differently things could have turned out if Sarah had succeeded in her plan. You know, Detective Parker said, following my gaze, in all my years investigating financial crimes, I've never seen someone so thoroughly destroy themselves. She really thought she could outsmart a real estate attorney at his own game. That was always Sarah's problem, I replied, sliding my phone back into my pocket. She was so focused on what she could take from others, she never stopped to consider what she might lose. 3 days later, I stood in my home office, my house now completely and legally mine alone. Through the windows, I could see the city skyline, the same view Sarah and I had once shared. But now, instead of feeling like a reminder of betrayal, it felt like a symbol of freedom. My phone buzzed. A news alert. Another article about Sarah's sentencing had been published, this one detailing all the properties she and Marcus had planned to steal. The reporter had done a thorough job, interviewing potential victims, documenting the elaborate schemes, exposing every detail of Sarah's attempted crimes. I sat down at my desk, pulling up the final property documents Robert had prepared. Everything was in order. Every I dotted, every T crossed, every T. Sarah's attempt to steal my home had failed so completely that it had not only cost her her freedom, but had also ensured she would never own property again. A knock at my office door interrupted my thoughts. It was Maria, holding a thick envelope. The last of the divorce papers came through, she said, placing them on my desk. Everything's finalized. I picked up the envelope, feeling its weight. Inside were the documents that officially ended my marriage to Sarah, though in truth our marriage had ended the moment she tried to steal my home. Thank you, Maria, I said, setting the envelope aside. And thank you for everything else. I couldn't have done this without your help. She smiled warmly. You know, Mr. Reynolds, in all my years working in law firms, I've never seen anyone handle betrayal with such precision. I laughed at her choice of words. Precision is what I do, Maria. Sarah forgot that when she decided to try her scheme. After Maria left, I walked to the window, looking out over the city I had built my career in. The same city where Sarah had tried to destroy everything I had worked for. Now she was beginning her 18-year sentence, while I was free to rebuild. My life exactly as I wanted it. My phone buzzed one final time. A message from Detective Parker. Just got word from the prison. Sarah's been processed and assigned to her permanent cell. Want to know something ironic? The cell block she's in overlooks a real estate office. I smiled, thinking about how fitting that was. Sarah had tried to use my profession against me. Had thought she could manipulate property law to steal my home. Instead, she would spend the next 18 years watching others live the life she had thrown away. The sun was setting over the city, casting long shadows across my office. I thought about all the nights I had spent building this life, all the work I had put into becoming a successful real estate attorney. Sarah had tried to take it all away. With her schemes and lies, instead, she had lost everything. Her freedom, her reputation, her future. And I hadn't had to do anything except let her own crimes catch up with her. That was the thing about justice. Sometimes the best revenge was simply making sure someone faced the consequences of their own actions. Looking out over the city lights beginning to twinkle in the dusk, I felt nothing but peace. Sarah had thought. She was writing the end of my story. Instead, she had only succeeded in writing the end of her own. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.